All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Bell Curve. Before we jump in, quick disclaimer, the views expressed by my co-host today are their personal views and they do not represent the views of any organization with which the co-hosts are associated with. Nothing in the episode is construed or relied upon as financial, technical, tax, legal, or other advice. You know the deal. Now, let's jump into the episode. Valora is the easiest way to send, swap, collect, and purchase digital goods on the Celo blockchain. Download the app and start exploring dApps like Ethic Hub today at valoraapp.com/empire.
All right, everyone, welcome back to another roundup of Bell Curve. You got, I'm still thinking about when you told me about my podcast voice. Michael's 1 and 2, Vance. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Good to be here, Mike. Good to be here. Midsummer Mike over here with your Florida shirt, ready to. I'm in Florida.
You're in Florida?
Yeah, it's actually he's been on the show. It's Miles. It's Miles' 30th. So I am down here. This is like the year of all my entire friend group is turning 30. So they're like 30th birthdays in various places. So
Vance and I were at a wedding this weekend. We got another one this upcoming weekend and one the weekend after. It's wedding season. Michael did, what was it, 13 weddings, 14 weddings last year? 11 weddings last year.
Damn. Sounds like the beginning of
any wedding that he's invited to. I've told all of my friends that I am only showing up to one of their weddings. So you better make it count.
Choose. Have you really thought if one of your friends was like, didn't invite you to the first wedding, expecting, the second?
I'm not coming to the second then. Yeah. One and done.
You get one. You better be really sure.
Yeah, seriously. I don't have that many weekends in a year.
I feel you. I was just talking this about I was just talking to this guy and he's like, oh, is it going to be a crazy weekend? I was like, yeah, we're not going super wild. He's like, after 30, it's not called going wild. It's called going mild. So that's what we're doing this weekend. Go Miles. Yeah.
Boys in the hot tub. Classic.
Boys in the hot. No girls allowed, baby. No girls allowed.
Good chicks.
Fellas.
Got to bring chicks. That's too.
Nice soak. Nice soak stuff.
I'm enjoying my 30s more than my 20s. Just to put it out there. It's a chill about.
That was my suspicion too. Seems like 30s, that's a good age to be. 30s hype. Early 30s, yeah, real hype.
Are you two sub 30 or over 30?
Sub 30.
Sub 30. Wow. Get ready.
We're right there, though. I'm 29. We're pushing up against it.
Yeah, we talk some crypto?
Yeah, before we painted too vivid of a picture with the hot tub here, let's get into crypto a little bit. So we've got predictions? Yeah, let's do some predictions because I think Coinbase earnings are actually going to come out during this recording. So just to refresh people a little bit, maybe I'll actually share my screen. 1 sec. Just so we can recap how Coinbase did over the course of last year. So they break out, basically, they've got 2 buckets with different subgroups underneath, but they've got transaction revenue and they've got subscription and services revenue. Obviously, transaction revenue is the bulk of their business, but Wall Street cares a lot about subscription and services because the general perception is transaction revenue is going to trend down towards zero over time. So they really want to grow that subscription services part of their revenue. Within transaction revenue, they break it out in between consumer and institutional. The consumer bucket is much larger just because of the amount of fees. It's kind of an unspoken thing. I guess it's spoken, but the fees that consumers get charged are much, much higher. Retail gets charged much higher fees on Coinbase than the institutional part of their client base. And then for subscription and services, they break it out between blockchain rewards, which is staking, basically, custodial fee revenue, interest income, which is generated largely based on their partnership with Circle, the Center Consortium, and then other subscription and services, which is kind of just a hodgepodge of different bets. It's kind of like Coinbase One, things like that. So, and then I guess this is, if you look at it in terms of their profitability, so there's net revenue, income, and adjusted EBITDA. And I was going back and Brian guided towards there's a change in philosophy at Coinbase, which is they basically had a goal to make all their money during bull markets and they were going to break even during these sorts of bear periods. That has changed now, and they have since guided that they want to be profitable in all market conditions. Although the CFO did walk it back a little and say, well, we're not committing to that in 2023. We want to see absolute growth in EBITDA. So classic, the CFO kind of walking it back a little. I'd be curious. I have some specific thoughts, but I would love to get your guys' thoughts on, hey, what are you thinking about for Q1? How do you think it's going to look?
I think there are a couple of things that I'm looking at, like maybe, and we can break it down. So on the revenue side of things, I would assume that Q1 revenue will look pretty similar to Q4, but potentially higher. And if you look at like, I bet the user base has actually shrunk a little bit, and I bet you'll see like downloads of the app, for example, are down, but you have higher ETH prices and higher crypto prices across the board with higher interest rates, which I think will drive higher revenue. So like first prediction I would have is higher revenue. Second prediction I would have is on the earnings side. Those are always a little tougher to predict, but I think it'll look pretty good actually, because they cut a ton of people.
Yeah, huge layoffs.
And I don't know like what percentage of their expenses come from personnel, but you got to assume it's pretty high with like several thousand people, and they had huge layoffs. So I bet their earnings will also look pretty good. Would have to assume that they do a lot of talk about like regulatory pressure, both on the staking products side of things, and then their Wells notice. And I bet that'll be like the main focus of this. And then one interesting thing that I bet like Main Street or Wall Street like won't really talk about is the new sources of revenue. But I'd be curious to see how they start talking about like their international futures markets, how they start like providing guidance around the L2, around base. Like that's what I think will actually be the most interesting aspect of this. That probably Wall Street will skip over. So those are my high level predictions.
Totally agree with all those. I would say in addition, just like breaking down this chart right here, consumer, I would say, is probably going to be pretty similar, if not a bit higher in terms of net revenue from transaction revenue. Institutional, I would imagine, is actually going to be pretty far down. Post FTX, I would imagine that a lot of institutions just frankly stopped trading. And I think in Q4, you had a lot of rebalancing and tax loss harvesting that attributed to the 13 million that you see in that column. The one that I think is going to be most interesting, which won't show up in Q1, but I think will absolutely be present in Q2, and they'll probably talk about it or guide towards it in the call, is the actual blockchain rewards subscriptions and services revenue. I think post Shanghai, a number of institutional partners put ETH into the staking program that they had, and a lot of that, I'd say all of that is probably ETH staking. I'm sure there's some other staking opportunities that exist or persist, but I would imagine that in Q2, that's going to jump the most. So whether or not they talk about it, I don't know, and it's not going to show up in Q1 earnings, but blockchain rewards is the one that I'm tracking the most.
Michael, real quick, I completely agree with you on the blockchain rewards, and those staking revenues are denominated in ETH. So even if they basically stay constant, the price appreciation is going to do very well for that particular line item. I would push back maybe a little bit on the institutional part of your observation, because maybe just a question to you. Obviously, crypto's done super well year to date. Who do you think has been buying? Do you think that's been institutional driven or retail driven?
I would say it's probably more retail than institutional. But I think a lot of, I guess the comparison that I have, the comparison that I have is from Q4 to Q1. And I think a lot of the institutions were tax loss harvesting at the end of last year. And so that's where a lot of that activity was driven from. There has been, price appreciation in January, and that was probably a lot of institutions rebuying. So maybe this is flat. Maybe it's even up. I don't know. But I do think that institutional relative to consumer isn't going to grow as much.
Yeah, you might be right. There was I went back and sort of skimmed the analyst notes from Q4, and there actually was a disclosure there that there was an inbound and interest on the institutional side for Prime. So they were onboarding a whole bunch of customers in Q4. They did kind of walk that back though and say, typically this sort of relative balance between, the retail and institutional part of their business doesn't change all that much. But I don't know. I'm not really sure. I don't really think retail is back in this market yet. I feel like they're not.
I agree. I completely agree with that. The one thing that I will say is that in Q4, late Q4, or maybe it was Q1, they did switch everybody over from Pro, who was a consumer, from Pro to advanced trading. And so there have been some product updates that I personally have found to be on the consumer side to be really beneficial. That's kind of what I'm basing in terms of, where this activity is coming from relative to the institutional side. Anecdotally also, just like institutions were not very active in Q1 because they were trying to pick up the pieces of what happened after FTX.
Yeah. Coinbase has this, Jason, just in response to your question about Base, Coinbase has this framework that they use to talk to their analysts into Wall Street. They call it their 70-20-10 framework. And they say about 70% of our resources and focus is dedicated to our core business. So basically everything that we're talking about, 20% is allocated towards more strategic long-term pursuits. And then 10% is kind of their risk-taking venture type investments within their product portfolio, which I actually think it's easy to understand and probably a pretty decent framework for running a business. So yeah. I kind of agree. I think Base is the wild card, but I don't. It's kind of, that would be firmly in the 10% bucket. So I doubt it gets much airtime.
That framework was started by Google in the early 2000s, and it was all about
over 20% of time or something goes to the.
And they also
work on anything.
They also did the 20% time for the engineers, and 70% is how we're going to make money in the next 3 years. 20% is how we're going to make money in 3 to 5 years, and 10% is how we're going to make money after the next 5 years.
I like that framework.
I mean, I haven't looked too much into Coinbase's financials, but what this tells me is that A, they're not leaving the US. Like, all of this is basically US revenue or US centric, especially on the retail side. And two, the staking arguments, or I guess the Wells notice hasn't formally turned into a suit yet, but they're going to fight that tooth and nail. That's one of their only, at least steady revenue segments that has a chance to, 5 or 10x. So I don't know. It seems like Brian is trying to set up a straw man for we're really going to leave if forced to. But at the same time, the math wouldn't bear that out at all. If Coinbase left the US, if Coinbase gave up on staking, I don't know how much of Coinbase would really be left.
Just to reiterate, I think I said this a couple weeks ago, but leaving the US doesn't mean they're leaving. They're still going to have offices in the US. It means the technical headquarters is going to be based somewhere else. But nothing changes. The product is still served to US customers. They still make US money and pay taxes for those US revenues. But it's just that, the technical headquarters would be in London or something.
Yeah. So I guess we'll see. I guess the last thing is that interest expense that's really been carrying their whole services and subscription bucket of revenue. I think it's probably too late. That USDC DPEG, I think that happened in March, and then there's been a draining of, there's been some $7 or $8 billion worth of market cap that's migrated out of USDC and into Tether. I frankly don't know how to forecast that, because that market cap moving to Tether doesn't even necessarily mean that the portion that they generate their interest on is they generate interest that's on USDC that's custodied at Coinbase. So I don't even know if that blip ultimately ends up impacting that, but it is worth calling it out because that is the part of their that's the part of the services and subscription revenue that's basically been carrying that whole number. And to be fair to Wall Street, they've questioned that. I'm not really sure it deserves to be in there, frankly. I don't know if interest expense is subscription.
They're not likely to get more people to put more principal into it at the size that they've been able to historically, or B, take advantage of the same level of interest rates. Just doesn't feel like that's in the cards, given everything that's going on, with the regional bank. I guess it's not even a crisis, or what's the name of it?
Implosion?
Kerfuffle?
Kerfuffle.
I feel like that's one of the things. This is totally unrelated, but I feel like there's this intentional, and Michael and I have talked about this before. There's this intentional memory holing, or trying to keep these headlines out of Bloomberg or New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. It's how many banks have blown up at this point, and we're still not allowed to call it a crisis. Just completely crazy to me. it feels like there's some serious, just like sheeple herding going on, at least for the mainstream media outlets.
It does feel interesting, like when in 2008, I mean, everyone in the world knew that these banks were blowing up and that everything was collapsing. And today you have like the size of the banks blowing up is actually much larger. And I feel like nobody's really talking about it outside of, FinTwit land.
Lesson there. There's a lesson there. I mean, the lesson there is that like it's much worse than anybody is actually telling people.
Well, I will say, I mean, totally agree with all of that. So far, throughout all of this process, there's been exactly $0 lost for depositors. Like there is an element of like, okay, sure, shareholders are done, bondholders are done, the companies themselves are going through massive layoffs, but our consumers are
here. Nothing to see here.
It's a liquidity problem. It's not a solvency
I don't
problem.
believe that at all. Like, what? Like,
I mean, but Michael, in 2008, it was the same thing. I mean, the bank accounts were backed by FDIC in 2008 as well.
Yeah, that's a little bit different because those were investment banks. And like when Lehman Brothers collapsed, there were a lot of clients who lost a lot of money. But I do think that there's an element.
I'm just saying your argument that you were arguing that because depositors didn't get hurt, then it's not like a big mainstream thing.
No, it is. I'm saying I agree. I would say, that being said, so far, nobody has lost money. Also, right now, I don't know, like I saw the list yesterday of the after hours trading of like 10 different regional banks, and PacWest was at the top of the list, and they were down like 60% after hours. So like this isn't stopping yet, but how far can the FDIC go in backstopping these? How far, like how deep are the pockets, right? And is everybody...
How deep are they? How deep? We're not
find out.
The FDIC insurance fund was before all this, and it's not infinite. It's like $125 billion or something.
I guess, what I'm saying is we have staved off depositors losing money so far. I don't think it can go forever. It doesn't look like this is stopping. Something is going to have to give at some point. And the second that depositors start losing money, this is going to be like the biggest news story I think, people are going to be talking about.
I don't think any depositor is going to lose any money. I think we're just going to print infinite money and just like,
I agree,
shove it under the rug. Like, that's why we're not allowed to talk about it on the internet or mainstream news. Just like, we need to go to the real sources to get that information. You know what I'm talking about, Michael.
Vance, where's your tinfoil?
There's some corners of the internet where the real news is being reported.
Yeah, where you spend time these days, man?
Oh, bro, you don't even want to know.
What's on your bookmarks list?
Let's see your open tabs right now.
There's some pretty funny open tabs right now. I'm not gonna lie. Let's move on.
Valora is the ultimate wallet for exploring the Celo ecosystem. Access over 50 different crypto assets and over 30 different dApps for swapping, sending, and growing your crypto, all from your mobile phone. If you want to see real-world use cases for crypto, Valora's dApps page is the easiest way to access a growing list of the latest refi and DeFi applications, including dApps like EthicHub, the first DeFi protocol to connect real farmers to yield farmers. With EthicHub, average crypto investors are earning up to 9% APY by providing secure, low-risk microloans to unbanked farmers around the world. Support crypto for good and instantly tap into new opportunities using your Valora wallet today. Download the app and start exploring at valoraapp.com/empire. That's Valora, VALORA, app.com/empire. Let's talk about
Blend.
Yeah.
Blur.
Yeah, let's talk about Blend. So Blur obviously is the NFT marketplace that launched earlier this year. They just announced something called Blend, which is sort of the next evolution of NFTFi. It's a peer-to-peer NFT marketplace where there's a bunch of... I'll just give you my... I mean, there are a bunch of features on it. I think there's something that's very hard to digest about it, because one of the things that it allows you to do is do buy now, pay later for NFTs. And a lot of people have had a very negative reaction to that, myself included. But I think if you look at the design of this marketplace, there are actually some things that are pretty cool about it. So basically, it's just a marketplace, similar sort of to to something like Aave, where you can deposit, where you can, lenders can lend to people who want to buy NFTs and only put down a small amount of collateral. And there's some kind of cool mechanism design about that, how that actually works. I think notably, they don't rely on oracles for price feeds. So because these are individualized loans and it's not peer-to-pool or something like that, individual lenders can set basically the interest rate that they're comfortable lending at. And the way they get around relying on an oracle is at any given time, the lender can essentially trigger a Dutch auction, and wherein another lender can either scoop up the NFT at a higher interest rate, or in the case that no lenders want to step in, they actually take possession of the collateral. We can dig into that. I think a lot of people have a lot of problems with that and see gamification there. But the other thing that I thought was kind of cool about this construction is they assume, I kind of see this in an evolution in crypto market structure, where if you have these sort of two-sided marketplaces where you're relying on liquidity, in the very beginnings of like Uniswap, you relied on retail liquidity, for AMMs. And then with Uni v3, kind of like, well, in order to create a better borrower experience, right? Kind of the demand side of the equation, really, there's more complexity that's needed to provide liquidity. And they were totally okay making that bet. And Blend basically came out and said, we are actually basing this, one of the assumptions in this marketplace working is the existence of more sophisticated lenders who can, and honestly, just hearing them say that, I was like, that's probably the right assumption. I'm actually not sure that it makes sense for retail writ large to just be market makers, can contribute passive liquidity. It's hard to be a market maker. So this is just kind of me rambling about this protocol. But what's your guys' take on this?
I love that Blur is out here just launching a buy now, pay later thing for NFTs. In this market, like this story market of all time for crypto, they're out here just doing like, oh yeah, buy now, pay. Meanwhile, buy now, pay later is like collapsing.
Right. My first reaction was that you guys should have read the room.
Aren't they like doing a bunch of volume right now though?
Yeah.
Like they have.
Yeah. Well, trading volume or lending volume?
Let's see.
I think one is the
pump some NFTs like Azuki.
17,000 ETH lended.
Yeah. No, I mean it's done well. The volumes were I would call it a successful launch. Also, since the launch, like the floors of a couple of NFTs that are like featured on Blend really popped. Like Azuki's ran up from like 15, like 14 or 15 to like 18. And if you dig into the data, there's a lot of users buying Azuki's with the buy now, pay later.
Yep.
So Mike, I agree with all that. I think the biggest thing in my mind is kind of the only thing that's left in DeFi right now is retail. And like there aren't any institutions that are stepping in and market making things. There aren't any institutions that are like going to be the initial backstop of liquidity for this ecosystem yet. Maybe it comes back eventually, and it could be designed for that, eventually. But I do think that we're kind of in this place of like, it's really only like crypto whales and retail players that are in this ecosystem. So like building that base of liquidity is going to be hard. If they can do it, that's going to be great. But I think the 30-hour Dutch auction is tough, because what that frankly means is you got to be like paying attention. And that goes off,
30 hours, you're not that long.
Yeah.
Can I tell you why, Mike? You've spent a lot more time digging into this than I have, but the reason I didn't like it was actually around their messaging. I think Blur's really smart, and like Pac-Man's smart and stuff. And they've clearly like advanced the institutional NFT like world in a good way, and like pushed competitors in the right direction. But they had their tweet thread announcement. There's like one of the tweets is like I'm just going to read it. Every $1 trillion market relies on financialization to scale. NFTs are no different. Instead of paying $1 million for a house, buyers put $100,000 down and pay the rest through their mortgage. Without this mechanism, almost no one would be able to afford homes. So he's explaining like the mortgage market. But like, I think that's a pretty dangerous thing to do, to compare massive leverage and debt positions on these extremely volatile JPEGs with the purchase of a home. And I think it sets this like dangerous mentality. I think people are going to get wrecked on this.
I do agree with that, though. It's just like a matter of whether it makes sense or is sustainable to lever up any asset in an attempt to buy it. So like, buying a house, it sounds very sweet. You have a family, you go buy a house, American dream, whatever. You do that with commercial real estate, 90% loan to value. Everyone stops coming to the office, all of a sudden the portfolio is zero. So like, is an NFT more like a house, or is it more like, commercial real estate? It's probably not similar to either. It's probably just like internet money with a picture on it.
Well, yeah.
And like, do these things have any fundamental value? That's kind of what the entire assumption of levering it up is based on. Or maybe it doesn't, and maybe it's all just meme value and it'll come back, and it's a good way to speculate. But
it reminded me a little too much of like, so Affirm and Afterpay and Klarna are like the main buy now, pay later platforms, and they absolutely ripped from like 2019 to 2021. I think there was like 2018 or 2019, there was like 2 billion in buy now, pay later debt. 2 years later, it increased 10x to like 25 billion. And if you look at the marketing of a lot of these buy now, pay later programs, they were like, this is really good for gig workers. This is great for young people with poor credit histories. This is great for the unbanked. And it was like a similar kind of like, I didn't like that messaging because you're kind of like preying on those folks. And it ended up completely backfiring for those people. And
in reality, it was great because of ZERP.
Yeah.
You can get a 0 interest loan on a mattress, or like, I do find it interesting that financialization of PFP NFTs, particularly right now, is what they're going after. And to Vance's point, there is no fundamental utility. There is no fundamental value. We created these things so far, and they have value in a secondary marketplace, but it will lead to some people, overextending and getting burned. And that, frankly, I think is probably not worth going super headfirst into this ecosystem right now. But maybe there's enough liquidity. Maybe there's enough liquidity on the lending side to actually make this work. That's kind of this thing that I keep going back to.
Let me just set up the overall this kind of a philosophical discussion. Like, how much financialization is enough financial? Like, some amount of financialization is okay and good, right? Like, to use your example, Jason, of like the mortgage, like America had a social contract where they made a decision where owning a house is a good thing. That's not the case everywhere. Like, there are other countries where everyone just rents. We were like, we think it's a good thing to own your home, and basically everyone should lever up and buy their home, and that'll be okay. So like, we all kind of thought that was good. But then, like, where's the line? Because now it's not small community banks that are lending to, to people in their community. At this rate, there's going to be none of them left. But really what happens is those are more like small distribution centers where these mortgages are originated, they're packaged up, and then they're sold to people in Japan. And it's like, well, maybe that because you have a larger base of people that are willing to buy those mortgages, you get a better price. But is that really a better system? But it's a philosophical question at a certain point.
I mean, so the 2 points coming out of that are, number one, a house is a fundamentally useful asset. Whether or not you live in it or somebody else does, someone's going to be living in it most likely. And number two, the other reason why home ownership became such an American mainstay is because overall, the residential housing market has gone up over the last 50 years, and that became the largest asset for most families. And that, I think, is, if you don't own and you rent, like you miss out on that wealth creation possibility over the last multiple decades. So I agree, there does need to be some financialization. It's interesting to have it be in this ecosystem. I guess maybe the point that I'm trying to make is the messaging around it and comparing it to mortgages is, to Yano's point, is not something that
I thought that was bad.
Let me make one more. In my mind, financialization equals good in my mind. It unlocks a bunch of opportunities, and that's fine. And like, if you think that NFTs are just like, or you either think that NFTs are just tokens with pictures, in which case, like, yeah, you should financialize these tokens. And then on the other side, like, you think that NFTs are this really valuable thing that like creator, in which case, yeah, financialization is also good. It was the messaging. And it wasn't just that messaging too. It was actually like, there's this strategy that they did that I thought was like, also not great, where you can, they're incentivizing loans on the platform through these things called lending points, that where the more lending points that you get, the more of the next airdrop you get. And in the mortgage land, which we're like, if you just keep going with that analogy, there's this thing called Regulation N, that it's known as the like Mortgages Acts and Practices. It's the mortgage advertising rule basically, and it prevents a bunch of like over promoting and over advertising and like doing deceptive advertising in mortgages. And to me, when I read this, I'm like, you are incentivizing people to like do more than they should on this platform to farm the next airdrop.
Oh, I agree with you, but my understanding of their point system was that they changed around, so they're incentivizing the lenders, not the people who want to borrow an NFT, buy now, pay later. So they're incentivizing people to provide liquidity and extend credit to people who want to buy. Because I think they're concerned of everyone, first of all, either gaming, like playing some kind of game where you set an unreasonably high, interest rate, and then people default on it. No one wants to pick it up. They scoop it up for a reasonable price and dump it immediately. That's the game that everyone has already outlined. But I think what they want to do is they want to provide a liquid market of sophisticated lenders, and those points are pushing people to, not pull out basically and do that. That was my understanding of those points.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same way that they incentivize the trading of NFTs as well, which is you get points whenever you put out an offer, not when you buy something.
Mike, do you feel comfortable sharing the like what you were explaining to me about the difference between like lending and borrowing on like Aave versus Compound versus Blur or on Blend? Do you?
Well, it was kind of, what I was trying to, I think it's look, I actually agree with everything you guys are saying. I just think it's important to provide like some kind of devil's advocate. First, I really do think I like, for instance, I think being able to buy and sell stocks is good. Do I think it's great that Robinhood basically pushes people into options because those are the highest margin products and that's what the order flow that Citadel wants to buy? I don't think that's good. So there's a bell curve of financialization that I think is basically accept. You see what I did there?
Yeah, but like I feel like this argument does not actually hold water when you just have like other examples. Sugar is bad for you. Should we allow children to drink orange juice? Probably not, but that's like part of a balanced breakfast and also part of like the food pyramid. Like that's not great. Every asset class benefits from financialization. Like why shouldn't crypto? Like have you seen the terms of auto loans? Like interest only auto loans that like jack up and refinance to the whatever the new interest rate that the Fed decides on. Like those are pretty toxic and poisonous. And not only do you have like the industry for the loaning of that, you have the industry for the buying of those loans and chopping those up and syndicating those to pension funds. So like, I don't know. I feel like crypto always gets put in this kind of like ideological corner of like, you shouldn't be doing those things. And those arguments just like never hold water if you look at the real world.
I agree with that. And you know what, even as we're here, because the fundamental question that we're asking is, do NFTs have value? And if NFTs have value, I think we would all say, then you should be able to, some degree of financialization is, right and good and acceptable.
Define value though. Like, does a car?
Yeah, well,
sure. Like,
I think that's the
like place. But like, what if you're like not doing anything with your life? Like, and you're just like speculating on this car because you want a cool one. I don't know.
I agree with the analogy, and 6 to 8 ounces of orange juice in the morning is probably healthy for you, but 60 to 80 ounces of orange juice is probably going to give you diabetes.
I agree. I think it's kind of everything in moderation, but it is because, when we're here sitting and saying, is it right and good to be able to take out a loan basically to buy an NFT? We're like, oh, I don't know about that, and sort of making a value judgment there. But none of us question the ability to take out a loan on, say, Ethereum or Bitcoin or something like that. And 99% of the world would say that's completely unacceptable level of risk, and that's not right and good. So do I think the marketing was a little aggressive? Do I think this is probably going to end in tears at some point? Probably. Do I have a philosophical problem with it? No. And the other thing that we haven't even really talked about is just like close your eyes and imagine it's like a year and a half from now, the bull market is returning. You have two options. You can either buy your NFT at full price or you can buy now, pay later. Our value judgments aside, people are just going to do that.
Or you have two options. You can sell your NFT for some asset for ETH, or you can borrow against your NFT to get some liquidity on it. Like these things should exist. It's just a question of, how pervasive they need to be.
You're always going to have people wanting to borrow against any asset that they own. I think the question is like, will there be lenders for that requisite, borrow flow? And this actually makes it possible. So I'm all there for expanding the use cases of crypto. I feel no moral high ground over anybody borrowing or trading or being a degenerate. Like, if you want to do that, go light yourself on fire. I might even lend to you to go do that. But like, it is what it is. I don't see the problem.
Just make sure you got the notifications turned on loud. And
Yeah, make sure you got PagerDuty. Like,
Don't like go on a camping trip after.
Yeah, no.
I mean, 30 hours is not that long.
I have one more question on this before you guys move on. So the way that buy now pay later works, the monetization scheme in like e-commerce, is I don't think it's a ZERP thing, Michael. My understanding of the way it works is actually you get a 0% APR loan because merchandisers are actually subsidizing that cost, because the amount, like your average, I forget what the unit is, it's the amount that you spend on one average session or purchase or something like that goes up 3 or 4 times. So
but the platforms still have to pay the full price. So like the firms, put the money up and they borrow to be able to make that interest-free loan. So that's more of what I know.
Got it. So my question to you guys would be, do you think there's ever a situation where Blend goes to basically charges NFT collections when they do their initial mint or drop or something like that to offer buy now, pay later? Because just look at the impact that it's had on Azukis and Miladies and Punks. Like if I were Blend, I would be like, hey, we've got this market of people that are going to offer loans against your NFTs, and that's going to result clearly in a higher floor price. But we got to get a little something.
I think like the primary asset issuer facilitating leverage trading effectively of these NFTs is probably a non-starter. I think it's something that you'll see like the cloak and dagger, like governance, we're going to vote this in, we're going to, get it going. And I think it's going to be really good for projects until it's really terrible, where there is no way that you can short NFTs right now. This is probably like, theoretically, if I were to go off and try to short NFTs, I would probably try to find an NFT perp to short. And then I would try to immediately go off and get the spot NFT, whatever it might be. And like literally in this, like the hard part about shorting crypto is that, like, especially if it's a closely held coin, like you can't make people give you their spot so that you can sell it into the market and, close out your short on the perp. What you have to do is you have to actually like go off and source that and horse trade, and it's extremely difficult. But on this, like you can literally just take people's NFTs. So I think like you're going to see these things pump, and then you're going to see someone smart, like the GCR of NFT trading, who knows? It's like a smaller cottage industry, but somebody's going to like take a shot at all of these that have all of this, potential borrow flow that you can take and use to short. So double-edged sword, to say the least.
Who's going to be the George Soros of NFTs?
I mean, you're going to make like $100 doing this stuff. So like maybe the risk is like never going to be worth it, but like, I don't know, the peak valuations of like Bored Ape Yacht Club and stuff like that would have been extremely juicy. We had some guy in the last cycle approaching us trying to get all the Top Shot NFT cards so you could short them. It was like this like rinky dink operation. It like didn't end up working. Like this actually makes it possible, which is pretty scary. The NFT had a rough year, so
They did. But I don't know. I kind of am with you. Jason, I agree with you, to just bring it full circle. I think the way that it was marketed, and something even after all this discussion, buy now, pay later for NFTs, I feel pretty confident that retail's not going to be on the winning end of that. But I also think you kind of have to choose. Like, do you want a free market where people are allowed to make these decisions, or do you want a market of TradFi where it's regulated all the way up to here, and this is what you're allowed to do versus not? And I kind of, maybe there are people out there that have thought in much more detail about me, and maybe that's a false trade-off, but that's kind of what I think of.
I do think that
do whatever they want. That's my personal philosophy.
Yeah, same. I do think that we're going to see a lot more NFT x DeFi financialization opportunities. Like there's going to be more AMMs that launch. There's going to be fungible tokens that are associated with these collections that's going to beget liquidity on these AMMs. Like we're going to see a lot more financialization of NFTs. And frankly, like broadly, philosophically, I agree with all of that. And yeah, it just depends on how you want to approach it and who you're trying to attract.
Yeah. Do you guys want to chat briefly? I think Coinbase earnings is going to come out soon. I want to check the results, but crvUSD launched this week, which is pretty cool. So I think we covered this a little while ago when we were talking about some of the new stables that are getting launched. So I would put Go sort of in this bucket, but this is kind of the convergence of a couple of different protocols that started out with separate business models, but are now converging. So I would put MakerDAO in that camp and Aave and Curve. But just to like do a level set on what Curve is and why they're doing this and how it sort of makes sense is Curve's obviously a stablecoin swap. Sort of like Uniswap, but instead of, their kind of volatile assets, they'll only do like stable coins or pairs of something that are similar in price. So something like Steve to ETH, and they kind of dominate that pool. And they've been talking about launching a stable coin for a little while. We're recording this on Friday the 4th, and it looks like the first loan for crvUSD went live. And I guess the two things to note here is it's going to be a revenue driver for them. So yeah, you basically have to borrow and there's an interest rate that ends up getting paid, which would be pretty good for Curve because it's an alternative revenue stream. You could also imagine, I think the reason this sort of makes sense, and one of our analysts, Dan Smith, is super bullish on this, is right now there are these, it's I'm blanking on the name, the three pool basically with USDC, USDT, and DAI. You could imagine a situation where Curve basically puts its own stablecoin in there. And what's kind of interesting is there's kind of this similar to Coinbase where there's going to be the race to zero in terms of fees. I think the general sentiment is that there's going to be fee compression in DeFi as well. If you had a pool where CRV was one of the assets that was in that pool, you could drop the trading fees to zero because you're earning interest income from the borrow of CRV. So it's kind of a way to subsidize going to zero cost. The other thing that's sort of cool about CRV, this is a little wonky, but it's an innovation in the liquidation mechanism. They have something called Llama, which is a little bit of a new twist on an AMM. So the way that liquidations happen historically is there's an oracle, and once your loan to value or whatever crosses over a certain threshold, then you basically just get liquidated, and some searcher understands that and they liquidate, and there's a price for doing that. My general understanding of this, and I've only sort of dug in high level, is that when you reach a certain like health check or health threshold, part of your position gets sold off and it's replaced with Curve, the stablecoin itself, which is actually pretty interesting. It's a much better user experience. So you don't just tick over a certain threshold and your entire position is liquidated. It's a pretty cool mechanism. So that was a lot of me talking. I don't know how much you guys have dug into this or what your thoughts are on this new wave of stablecoins or Curve in general.
I have a really high level view of this, which is that typically been pretty bearish on these like protocol based stablecoins, but like when I was kind of ragging on Aave's stablecoin Go when they announced it, but this one, seeing how they've structured it, makes me think that they're just going after Maker and that they're going after DAI basically. And like I've spent a lot of time at Maker, and like it's I think Maker didn't move on some things, and like they've gotten like a little bit stagnant. And there's some like key people who have left Maker recently, and I think Curve sees like this huge opportunity to go after Maker right now, and that's my like zooming that's what I would assume is the multi-year vision here, is to go after Maker.
I think the liquidation mechanism is cool. You are basically warehousing the risk of that liquidation within the Curve stablecoin itself, but like it certainly would help, and it's certainly something that Maker doesn't have in the worst case scenario, where instead they just start printing Maker, which is like really like a bad idea.
The lending, liquidating AMM thing that they have.
Yeah, that
continuously liquidates and
yeah, but it does it piecemeal so that you don't have like, hey, Maker liquidators, like everyone wake up, like there's a 400,000, ETH slug hitting the market. Like, is anybody prepared to bid? And frankly, when all that stuff was happening last year around like, I think the bad ones were in June, the liquidations, like seeing those come down the pike of like
there's 100,000 ETH about it's just like, how is the system going to deal with this in a time where there is very little TradFi liquidity, very little, retail liquidity, whatever. But it did work perfectly, frankly. There was not another Black Tuesday or whatever that incident was.
That's because we had someone on the oracles putting the thumb on the scale. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I do remember that. There was there were some fortunate oracle delays. But like, not having that is good. I just kind of wonder, like, Curve has now emitted a lot of its own token. There's not like a ton of rewards to go around. Like, a lot of them are already being claimed by like the people who are doing the Curve gauge farming. Like, how do you bootstrap, from 0 to, I think Maker has, what's like Maker's TVL, 7 billion or something? 5 billion. 2 of that's, USDC, probably 3 billion of that is ETH. Like, how do you actually meaningfully take share? The reason that Michael and I still use Maker is because, like, we know that it's battle tested. I don't think the appetite to put large amounts of ETH into new code bases is super high right now. So I think that's kind of my question, is like, how impactful is this really? But yeah, I mean, the Curve team is smart. If nothing else, like, they'll figure out a way to game it effectively.
Totally agree with all of that. I think the only kind of perspective that I would include, this past week, we've spent some time with some regulators and talking to them about, what their priorities are, especially from a crypto perspective for the next 6 months. I think the sentiment coming out of those conversations is there's going to be a bill that includes and mostly features stablecoins as the primary kind of component of the regulation. I'm not saying that, I actually agree with, this is an interesting model. The new liquidation methods are awesome. It's going to be really difficult for a decentralized stablecoin, I think, to integrate into a legal framework in the US going forward. And so when we're talking about how do you break through, how do you get to the size of Maker already has the distribution to be able to have DAI in all the places that it already has it integrated, like Coinbase or any other centralized, providers. It's just going to be an uphill battle, I think, after this bill gets released. And I think the text is going to get released in the next couple of months. It will be difficult, I think, to be able to compete with some of the more centralized stablecoins, unfortunately. But that's kind of the broad stablecoin perspective that became more apparent this week.
Yeah, I have a question. This is a little in the weeds of Curve and their whole tokenomics and everything, but I think people initially sort of got excited by this because, kind of what I was mentioning before, it's a way to subsidize fees on some of their pools, and I think people generally agree it's going to be a race to the bottom. The question that I have for you, though, is sort of Curve's tokenomics are sort of like Bitcoin in that you sort of need the number to go up. Like, they live and die by liquidity, and the way that they direct liquidity to their pools is by emissions. And what they have just like Bitcoin, they have a deflationary supply schedule. I think it's like every year it's like 15% lower. So they want to have basically a constant amount of, dollar denominated value that they can use to incentivize liquidity into different pools. And so that's why the gauge and the lock rate, that VE vote escrow mechanism, is super important, because they want to incentivize people to lock that curve up and not to go and sell it onto the open market. I feel like if they have their own sort of horse in that race, then I feel like that takes away an enormous incentive for other people to lock their curve. I'm sure this is a really smart team. I'm sure they've thought about this, but I feel like it does risk destroying the golden goose kind of, or the long game that they're playing. So I don't know if you guys have thought about that.
Well, the thing that I have thought about, independent of this launch, is, Curve launched, when was it? August 2020. And if you remember, the largest lock at the time, which gave you the most vote escrowed Curve, was 4 years. So we're coming up on a year left of where I would assume most people put their locks. And so not only is it going to be hard because you've got, less supply and less incentives, and number has to go up for, those incentives to stay, you're going to have a lot of unlocking of the token itself in not like that long of a time. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out as well.
There's a lot of those cases, like not just Curve either. Like, if you look at Arbitrum, if you look at Optimism, like,
there's going to be multi-billion-dollar unlocks kind of like by early 2024. I think a lot of these are running towards product market fit and like token economics that make sense before those unlocks hit. And frankly, like my expectations of where the market is going, I think that a lot of these things might peak before the cycle itself peaks. Like you're kind of early at this point if you know, your unlocks are coming in 6 months and you don't have things figured out. Like that's how I would at least kind of think about it.
Yeah, they're a smart team. I really like the stuff they ship and generally how they think about stuff. So,
yeah, no,
that's cool. I don't know. All right, what do you guys want to? Have earnings come out yet for Coinbase?
I was just checking. I haven't seen anything.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about. I mean, I know we've talked about this before, but sort of in more degen sort of land here, we've got Pepe Coin, which, depending on, I guess, how you're allocated, is the gift that keeps on giving, or it's like the bane of your existence. But that thing just keeps running. I think the market cap on it is 700 million or something right now, last time I checked. And
the market wants things to rip right now. It just people want it. People want it. That's my take.
Crazy.
Yeah,
that's nuts. It's really, it's done a lot more than I thought it was going to, for sure. We talked about that being an indicator. I'm curious, like, do you view that as just kind of noise and the markets do what's going to do? Do you take anything away from that?
Not at all.
No, you need to read deeply into that stuff, even though it seems so silly. And
it says you got to pull up your 4chan account. You got to work out right here. You got to look.
Would this have happened in Q4 of last year? Absolutely not.
No.
Q3, probably not. Q2, certainly not. Like, it's been a year since this.
I was going to say, I don't know if post Luna this happens in 2022 at all.
Totally. And like, you're seeing these big LST farms, you're seeing these like L1, meme coins. And like, there's also a reason why you don't see this on any other chain. ETH is the only chain with enough liquidity for this to possibly happen. And like, look at the burn. Today is 8,000 ETH burn. You got 10K spent on ETH transaction fees overall today. Like, you're probably looking at a scenario where if we get back to like 4,000 or 5,000, we're going to be breaking all-time high fee revenues pretty easily by like the start of the run. And so like, people are starting to, and it's not just about like the trading volume. People are starting to self-organize into like these little like groups that are searching for $10 million market cap meme coins. And, the hot ball of money is turning itself over and it's going around and round. And like, that's kind of what you need. You need like a sentiment recovery and you need a credit recovery. And we still haven't seen that, but like, we're starting to check the boxes off. And like, I talked to some guy who works at a different fund over the weekend, and they're more of a trading fund. And he was like, dude, like my dopamine receptors are just so shot. Like I need something to trade like at all times. Like, Pepe has been like really like big for me. It's like,
really
water, water, like, take a walk around the block. But I think it's big that people are starting to do this stuff. And even like the NFTFi stuff on Blur and Blend and all that stuff, like that's great too. And guess what? It's just burning a bunch of ETH. So I'm here for it. Also, NFTFi is only an ETH L1 phenomenon, just for the record.
Yep.
So thanks for the comment.
Not to throw a whole wrench into this perspective, but one idea that I was contemplating recently is, okay, so, the model is the model where 1559, you burn ETH as opposed to keeping it. But we're on track to burn about 1 million ETH, give or take, maybe even more than that over the next year. What if that was distributed back? I mean, it's going to be more, but
2 million.
I think 2 might be too much. We'll see. But what if that 1 to 2 million ETH was distributed back to stakers? That would immediately put the staking rate somewhere in the like high teens, I think, based on 15% being staked right now. Kind of an interesting concept of increasing the staking rate instead of, burning it and having it be deflationary.
I think we're going to see major discussions on this. I listen to Anthony Sassano's Daily Gwei podcast, like basically every day. But he is kind of like a good temperature, thermometer for like what the ETH core devs are thinking. and he like, he's thrown out a few like different tidbits over the past like couple months. One is like, to what your point is like, it's 80-20 right now in terms of what gets burnt versus what gets given to stakers. Should it be 20-80? So that was like one interesting one. The second one was a cap on the amount of ETH that's allowed to be staked to maintain a minimum APY. So that's another. And then the third is like the formula for the actual inflation is the square root of, I don't know. It's just some math that I don't have on hand right now, but it's pretty complicated. And his thought process is like, should that be higher or should it be lower or should the equation be different? It's like the square root of some number, and I'm sure it has mathematical significance, but it doesn't mean anything to me. And so like, I think those are going to be interesting concepts to go through, especially over time. Because like, what happens if ETH scales 100x, and fees don't scale 100x? Like, we're going to need to start making changes. And like, there's a long roadmap for Ethereum. We're going to be at this for probably the next 5 years, building the protocol, tweaking the economics. I don't think we've seen the last in terms of like ETH economics and the potential changes to go in there.
Yeah.
Coinbase earnings.
Are we going to make it?
I think I just saw, but
I didn't get my hands.
Nah, I think what happened? Oh, nice.
Revenue beat.
Not surprising given the volatility in the quarter. Jesus, Carvana shares jump. I mean, the block did well. Coinbase did well. DoorDash didn't do well. Sorry, the block, not the block.
Yeah.
Shopify way up.
Watch yourself, Vance.
What did wait, what outside of the, so it was a beat on revenue? How'd they do on
Trying to find
it on their site? Yeah, I'm trying to find it too.
Beat on revenue. Little short on trading volume.
Yeah, no, could you share your screen?
I just typed in Coinbase revenue on Twitter and I'm scrolling through all the watcher gurus. We're at the point of the market where it's only like the watcher guru.
All right, I got it.
All right, now Mike gets to share his screen.
Here, one sec. All right, I haven't looked at this yet, but I'm gonna share. All right. So, I mean, at first glance, this looks a lot better on the. So net revenue came in at 756 million, only a loss of 79, which is huge. And on, we didn't really talk. That's amazing. I mean, there's a huge headcount reduction, and it didn't show up immediately because there's severance and stuff that you have to pay. But I'm sure some of that.
Well, wait. So sorry. Go back. The biggest number there is the adjusted EBITDA.
Yeah,
284.
Damn, that looks. Yeah,
so a lot of this is non-cash cost.
Yeah,
man. My hope is that when all these tech companies, when interest rates get low again and they really reaccelerate, like, I just hope they don't hire all these people back. Like, just like learn your lesson. Like, no more like yoga and smoothies. Just like run a profitable business.
yeah,
Wow, bad take on my part with the institutional.
yeah.
Atrocious.
So but to your credit, I mean, it's not like it didn't, it came out 22.
It's like basically their biggest real source of revenue outside of transactions.
Look at that interest income, baby. Quarter of a bill.
Thank JPEG.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah.
I mean, so blockchain rewards makes sense because ETH is up in price.
Yes.
I would imagine that this jumps a lot more in Q2.
Yeah, I would guess so too. One thing that I've been surprised about, not to distract from this too much, is, CB ETH was one of the big liquid staking providers that enabled withdrawals post Shapella, and they've lost market share since then. It's been, I think they're down something like 2%, and Rocket Pool's been crushing it. They had their Aura upgrade, I guess, and that's actually made a pretty big difference. But yeah, I think Lido and Rocket Pool and Frax were basically the big winners, and I don't really know why.
I mean, basically just Lido, but the other 2 or 3 are cool also. But like the amount of like I was having like 20, 30, 40,000 ETH days. Like, it's cool that Rocket Pool added 3,000, 2 days ago, but like, time to pay.
Market share's up. I mean, the market share's up. I know it's always easy that you bet on the incumbent or whatever, but like, it is very hard to hold like 70% plus market share for a long period of time. I think it's a tough thing. I'm not advocating for Rocket Pool out here. I mean, I like Rocket Pool. I actually think the Aura upgrade is super interesting, but
I think the long tail of LSTs is going to be a major narrative. I've said this before on this podcast, but it's going to be LST Summer in my mind, because
I agree with that.
You've got like 5 to 7, very, very small at this point, LSTs that I think are going to grow relative in size. And there's going to be all this infrastructure built around like indexes for LSTs, and you're going to have like liquidity pools for LSTs. I think it's going to be interesting to see, how material they become, but my guess is that's going to be a big narrative.
Yeah. I mean, the liquid staking category just passed DEXs in terms of total value locked for the first time.
And like, now all the LSTs are going to be in short order the ETH asset that is put into all these DEXs. Like, that's why I kind of think Frax is like an interesting model, albeit much smaller. It's like, it just kind of internalizes all of the endogenous yield that exists because of the LSTs on, their stablecoin. I'm sure they're going to build their own DEX, and like, you can do that. I think the question is like, will the regulators ever like just, say nope and like kind of put a stop to it? But it like, these things have a ton of different avenues to capture value. And so to Michael's point, I do think there will be some of them that, like, as much as I hate this, there will be like a magic internet money liquid staking token, like, like Frog Nation rise up against the evil venture capitalists, and who knows if it ends well or not, but that will definitely be a narrative.
So the stock is up like 3.5.
Yeah, not a ton.
Not a ton.
I think a lot of people expected this type of an outcome.
I agree. And I think they want to hear what Brian and crew have to say about regulation. I think it's going to be relatively large.
Once again, I like doubling down. I think that we're going to get some text in the next 2 to 3 months. It's going to be something that's sensible. It's going to be bipartisan in the House. And then it's just going to be a question of whether or not it can get through the Senate.
Yanner, you asked earlier about the analysts not asking about Base. Do you think that Coinbase wants the analysts to understand Base at this point?
What did I ask about the analysts not asking about Base?
I thought you mentioned at the beginning of this, like that was part of the,
part of it. Oh, I see what you're saying. Do I think that Coinbase doesn't want Wall Street analysts to understand Base?
The thing I'm asking is, this isn't a Mike Ippolito original thought. I'm sort of borrowing this from someone who planted this idea in my brain. I don't want to blow up his spot. The one negative potential downside of Base is it might end up drawing a lot of scrutiny to what's going on in centralized sequencer land on the roll-up layer. And I'm not really sure if you want that many eyeballs on that, frankly.
No.
If you start looking at the sequence, starts looking.
I don't think you do.
Don't
look too close.
That's the thing about regulation. Like, some of it's going to be good. Some of it's going to be like, you can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Right. It'll be black and white. Some things will be white. Some things will be black. But I do think, like, one of the things that I think there's going to be 2 things that come out of this. Number one, what? Number one, how do you go from being a security to a commodity is going to be an interesting thing that gets defined. The other one is, what does decentralized mean? Is it, 5 nodes, 3 nodes, 21 nodes? Who knows?
I don't think I can share this now. I'll tell you after we stop recording. This is a lame podcast thing to say, but there's a new L2 coming from like a big company, and
hell yeah.
I think we're gonna start seeing a lot more like Base like things launch, where companies are like, oh damn, smart idea. Let me go launch an L2 with a fully centralized sequencer. All right, sounds good. Down.
I mean, if you have money transmitter licenses, have at it. I think Coinbase does.
I agree.
There's many such cases.
I think companies with money, yeah, exactly. So.
You know, it is funny. Sometimes we're off in our own little crypto land doing mechanism design and stuff like that. And I've been getting pretty deep into the weeds in MEV this season. I saw this take from this guy on Twitter, Ceteris Paribus. I can't find the tweet. I was just looking for it. But it was like the unpopular opinion, but MEV is going to be solved in an off-chain way. It's called going to jail. I kind of agree with him. It's like, yeah, dude. Like, what's all this mechanism designed for preventing sandwiches? Like, you will go to jail. That's called front running. That we got a law about that.
So we've seen a few big MEV players stop doing it over the past couple weeks. Not going to name any names.
Couple weeks. Wow.
They're like they were the largest block builders and just like well-known TradFi names, and they just stopped. And they've stopped doing some forms of MEV, but have continued doing others. And so, like, from the outside looking in, it feels like a lawyer got to them and was like, some of this is not okay to be doing.
I mean, the other piece of news that happened this week was Nate from OpenSea officially charged.
Man,
Yeah, I saw that.
What do you guys think of this?
I mean, he did something wrong. I think that's clear. And, like, you know, you shouldn't do that stuff in general. I think just reading through the Financial Times article, like, the sentence is, like, you know, maximum of 40 years. Like, does the punishment fit the crime?
He made $50,000.
He hasn't been sentenced.
Right.
But I've met him once. I think Michael might have as well. He seemed like a pretty, like, nerdy but nice guy. And yeah, I mean, it's obviously illegal to do that, but it was such a small amount that going to jail for 40 years feels like just like a lot for that type of violation.
I mean, he got convicted of fraud, which is a felony. Like, even no matter what the sentence,
the specific,
no matter what the sentence is, like that's tough.
I think he also went to court at, like, probably the worst time sentiment-wise for crypto.
Exactly.
Like, you're not going to get the benefit of the doubt with generally anybody.
Yeah.
But
I think he goes to jail for less than a year, gets probation and a fine, but he still has a felony on his record, which sucks.
yeah, and, like, dude,
And for what it's worth, I do think what he did, like, you're the definition of insider trading is pretty clear. Like, you're the head of a product for a marketplace. There's a level of responsibility that comes with that title, and in that role, you know exactly what's going on, and you know what you're doing there. So therefore, I think what he did was wrong. I think the punishment is wildly unfair, and I think both of those can be correct. And I also think that the regulators here are looking in, like, the wrong direction here. They're like going after this 50K thing or 60, however much it was, and, like, meanwhile there's a bunch of other stuff they should be looking at. So
oh yeah,
You know what?
that's my take.
I think no commenting on, like, what he actually did, which whatever, but I think it's just important to have some empathy. Like, everyone knows his name now and that he did this, and I think that's because, to be honest, okay, like, the jail would definitely suck. The felony, if he works in crypto, I'm not really sure that impacts his job prospects, to be completely honest with you. But I you know, but I do.
Come on, Mike.
are you gonna hire him?
Yeah.
Wow, fair point. He should. I don't know. I've met the guy, but I don't know. I think it does suck to have your name just, like, splashed all over like that, and to be the poster boy, because that's what he's like, the poster boy, and that just sucks.
Yeah,
that really sucks.
He's gonna have a long time to think about, you know, just that one fucking click of the mouse.
I think it was more. I think it was more than one, but
yeah, there was a few. He was a repeat offender, but yeah, don't do that.
This isn't just NFT land, by the way. Like, there was this woman named Ann Herbert, I think it was. She was a Nike employee for 25 years, and she was I think she was flipping Nikes on the secondary based on, like, because she had access to the memos that the CEO was going to send out. I'm probably getting this story really wrong, but she got fired, and I think she might face some time. Like, that's illegal, and she was selling them on StockX or something like that.
if it feels like it's an unfair advantage, don't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Always.
Speaking of unfair advantages, Blockworks launched GovHub this week, which is the most powerful governance platform in crypto. So if you want an unfair advantage in governance, if you own governance tokens, you should subscribe to Blockworks Research.
Always be selling.
So are you guys just going to be like massive delegates?
Yeah.
We're going to be delegates. Yeah.
Wow.
Okay.
We got some tokens we might delegate to you.
Every crypto venture firm cannot be cannot be active in governance right now. And we got you.
There's a certain amount of fit. I mean, our analysts, they only like keep up to date with like three protocols at a time. Like they are so in the weeds with this stuff. Like they're the ones that you'd want to delegate to. So
Don't govern too hard. You and Nate might be seeing each other at some point.
oh boy. All right. Just to end this on a more uplifting note, like a funny story of the week. I don't know if you saw that Pornhub pulled out of Utah. Do you guys see this?
Oh, I saw the headline.
Because of the KYC stuff.
So Pornhub.
Why do you think Vance just left Utah? The guy was there for like 6 weeks.
Okay.
Show us your tabs.
Show us the tabs.
All right, everyone. Hope you have a good rest of your week. Good Friday, and see you guys next week.